Okay, the countdown clock is running. We are actually live right now, but people will, so the notice goes out to thousands of people that we are live. And what they'll see is pretty much what you should be seeing on your screen at the moment, the countdown timer running. And people can actually hear us. And they can actually even see us. And
the technology is marvelous. Yes.
So we'll be starting, as it says, in about 9 minutes now. So everything is in place, and dozens of questions are coming in already. I can see that. And oh, wait, no, because I haven't started the share screen. Hold on, I have to go back. And there we go.
There we are, yes.
Okay. Yeah, lots of questions are coming in. I can see that. And I can also, yeah. Let me. Okay. Okay. Yeah, in the next 24 to 48 hours, there will be thousands of people who are going to be watching this. And while we're actually live, probably over 1,000.
Well, I'm just delighted that you've been so successful in New Thinking Aloud. And it's very, very gratifying to see the wide variety of people you've interviewed. And I haven't listened to all the interviews, but I've listened to enough of them to know that your questions are very articulate. You've really done your homework, in contrast to some of the people who interview me. Yes, it's always a delight to have an interview with somebody who really knows what topics to discuss and what questions to ask.
Well, I remember, Stan, the first time I ever heard you speak would have been about 1969. When you gave a talk in San Francisco at the First Unitarian Church on the dream telepathy research. So
oh, good heavens.
I've been following your career for over half a century.
Remarkable. Yes, the Unitarian Church has actually been, as a whole, has been very broad-minded, very accepting of parapsychology.
Yeah.
And as you know, a lot of mainstream churches and religious groups think that parapsychology is the work of the devil, or is demonic, or is a distraction. And so it's always a pleasure to talk to Unitarian Universalists, Unity Church members, and other churches that are very, very open really to the whole field of consciousness studies.
Well, the Unitarians in particular have a close relationship with the New England Transcendental movement.
That's right, they do. And Waldo Emerson and that whole group, you bet.
Yeah, and of course, William James was affiliated with that.
That's right, of course.
Yeah. Emerson was William James' godfather.
I didn't hear that.
Oh, Ralph Waldo Emerson was William James' godfather.
Oh, I didn't know that. Really?
Yes.
Wow, that's remarkable. Wow.
It's because William James' father, Henry James, was a friend of Emerson and Thoreau and the Transcendentalists.
Oh, that's a marvelous lineage.
Yeah. And I know William James probably didn't even know the word parapsychology, but he's really not only the father of American psychology, but I think of him as the father of American parapsychology.
Oh, absolutely. Of course, in his day, the word psychical research was used.
And you know, there's some dispute talking about William James because some people don't think that he believed in survival after death, that he never was willing to commit himself, but I'm pretty sure he did.
You're absolutely right. I don't know if you know this or not, but I just reviewed a book for a publisher on various aspects of the neurophenomenology of mystical experiences. And in the author's statement of William James, they say, William James never found his white crow, never embraced the field. And of course, I thought that was a gross misrepresentation of his point of view. And so I told the publisher, if you want me to write an endorsement of the book after it's published, you've got to get that statement corrected. We'll see if they do.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember you sent me an email about that. Did William James ever find his white crow? He was very explicit. He said, Mrs. Piper is my white crow.
That's right. This is what I told the publisher. Exactly right.
Yeah. But he went even further than that. In one of his last essays, he claimed that Richard Hodgson, his associate, had manifested through Mrs. Piper in a manner that was so convincing you couldn't explain it away as telepathy. He said it's either Hodgson's spirit or it's another disembodied spirit who's impersonating Hodgson.
Oh my God, that does go further. You're right. That's remarkable. Yes.
Yeah. Well, we're less than a minute before we begin formally. And as a matter of fact, I can see that it's already after 1 o'clock because I started a minute late. So I think it's time to get going here. I'm going to stop the share and welcome everybody. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. I am live today with one of my heroes and a person who was a great inspiration to me to become involved in the field of parapsychology and transpersonal psychology, Stanley Krippner. Welcome, Stanley.
Oh, bye. Thank you so much. You're very generous.
It's a pleasure to be with you. It's a pleasure to share your presence with our live audience. People are already submitting questions, but I thought it would be good to just begin by giving people a little bit of an update of your work and your new book, and also sort of a summary, if possible, of your career as a parapsychologist and a psychologist working in the transpersonal area.
Well, I'll be happy to do so. I'll try to keep it brief so we can get on to the questions. But my interest in what today is known as consciousness studies goes back really to my childhood, when I started recording my dreams, when I became interested in hypnosis, when I began having what are now called psychic experiences, and when I came into the University of Wisconsin. There was virtually no place to discuss them or to delve further, except for one person, my psychology philosophy professor, A. Campbell Garnett, was extremely interested in the field. He was the one theist. All the other members of the department were atheists, the philosophy department. And he's the one who got me interested in J.B. Ryan. And as head of the speakers committee at the University of Wisconsin, I invited Ryan to speak, much to the opposition of the psychology department. But he had a full house, and that led to my visits to the Duke University laboratory, where I met both J.B. and Louisa Ryan on numerous occasions, and then that launched me into an exploration of the field. But at the same time, I did research in other altered states of consciousness, hypnosis, psychedelics, dreams, and in our dream laboratory at Maimonides Medical Center, we focused on studying telepathic dreams, which I did for 10 years. And then the money gave out. Came to California and have been working in academia ever since. And of course, I have authored, co-authored, edited, co-edited a number of books. Probably the most important one being a book published by the American Psychological Association, Varieties of Anomalous Experience, co-edited with Edsel Cardani and Stephen Lynn. So my most recent book is Understanding Suicide's Allure. And my co-authors and I have come up with a book that's a very in-depth study of suicide with a lot of personal experiences, some of them unfortunately friends of mine, but I was able to devote 2 full chapters to dreams and nightmares, 2 chapters to psychedelic psychotherapy. I brought in hypnosis as a therapeutic device, and I was even able to talk about survival after death, which none of the other suicide texts do.
That's really wonderful and important. And we already have a question from somebody whose name is almost impossible for me to pronounce, but I'm going to try to pronounce their name, Cremino Se Aplethea, who asks, says, my discovery of countless near-death experiences have made me consider that there may be a life after death. Do you believe there is a life after death?
Well, I go by the evidence. And you've read about near-death experiences, out-of-body experiences, etc. And there's even more information if you go into the mediumship studies. And I think a very convincing case can be made that there is some sort of post-mortem existence, what we call life after death. The interesting thing is that it is very, very different than what you read about in most of the mainstream religions. There is no punishment, no judgment, no suffering in hell, but there is the possibility of reincarnation. There is the possibility of communicating with one's loved ones who are still alive, and there is the possibility of engaging in enjoyable experiences after death. So you have to realize I'm never 100% convinced about anything, but I think that the bulk of the evidence has been very reassuring to me and very convincing to me that there's some sort of post-mortem existence.
What would you say, Stan, of all of this evidence, what strikes you as the strongest?
Well, I think the cross correspondences, past and present, which for the listeners, when mediums come up with information from a discarnate spirit who's discarnate, no longer alive, and several mediums pick up different aspects of what that spirit is trying to tell them that fit together. I think that this is a pretty convincing evidence because it goes beyond what you can figure out by fraud, by coincidence, even by ordinary telepathy. So I'll tell you briefly, I've done one study on this topic. I actually interviewed an events planner for the U.S. Army who began having dreams about soldiers who had been killed in Afghanistan and Iraq. And they would come to her in her dreams, and she would copy down all the information, and they would give some clue as to their identity, their name, their company, their insignia, just enough that she could identify them. She brought this to her friend, who was a Native American chaplain. He said, yes, I know this person. I knew that person when I was in Afghanistan or Iraq, and everything checked out. And she had 10 dreams, and each one of them was about somebody who could be identified. And what was the message that they said? Even though they died at early ages, 18, 19, 20, 21, they said, don't grieve me. Don't have my relatives grieve me. I'm having a very happy time over here on the other side. Very reassuring. Anyway, I got this published in the Journal for the Society for Psychical Research. It's there for anybody to see. And it's coincidence or it's fraud. I doubt it. I doubt it. But I think that that's my own personal experience. And then the chaplain was sent off to Korea, and so their liaison sort of ended. But I'm so happy that she shared this with me, and I was able to examine it from a scientific perspective and get it published.
So in this particular case, would you say this was involved a cross correspondence between the chaplain and the other person?
Well, this is a very different type of cross correspondence, but it's on the same ballpark. The chaplain was Native American, and he had shamans in his family, medicine people in the family, and they said, you do not have the gift of communicating with the dead, but your friend does have the gift. And so let her communicate, bring the information to you, and you can work together, which is exactly what he did.
Very interesting. Here's a question from Sniffing Dog Art Official, who says, what are your thoughts on non-human intelligent being, ETs, angels, visitors, and so on? Do you think they exist only in the mind, or do they also have a separate or more physical reality?
You know, I wish I had a good answer to that question. And I really don't have anything conclusive. All I can say is, look at the evidence. More and more evidence is now being revealed by the U.S. government at long last. And there are certainly unexplained aerial phenomena, as the government now terms it. And there are unusual sightings in the sky that have been recorded that indicate that some intelligence is beyond the maneuvering of these crafts or light forms or whatever they are. I think that who or what is powering these vehicles, or maybe the vehicles themselves are intelligent, I would not dare to say. All I can tell you is that I've had a couple of experiences, and I'll just describe those very, very briefly. They both took place in Brazil, one of my favorite countries. And I was with a group of people. I was taking on a guided tour of spiritual centers in Brazil. And they said, Stan, have you ever seen a flying saucer? I said, no, I think they're avoiding me. Well, that very night, I had a phone call, and it was one of our members saying, come outside, there's a flying saucer up in the sky. I ran outside, didn't even put my slippers on, which meant that I got cuts in my feet, but it was worth it. We went up to a small hill, and there in front of us was an object the size of the moon, but much closer, a mosaic of red, green, and blue lights flashing on and off. And sometimes the light would veer from the globe, sometimes come back. And we watched it. And I said, now, is it a weather balloon? No, it can't be a weather balloon. Is it an optical illusion? Well, maybe so, but we're all seeing the same thing. Is it a Earth satellite? No, it's too big for that. We kept watching it until it faded away. But it's interesting that the object appeared right after, at dinner, I was saying, no, I think they're avoiding me. Years before that, again in Brazil, I went to a spiritual community outside of Brazil City. And this is a wonderful spiritual community where homeless people have gathered, and they work together, have their own garden, have a life for themselves much richer than they would have had in the slums. And I had two friends with me, a German friend and a Brazilian friend. And we went to the meditation retreat in a little amphitheater, and I was watching the pageant and was not looking up to the sky, which is unfortunate because my Brazilian friend and German friend, both sitting in different places, were looking up in the sky. We got back together again after the meditation was over, and my Brazilian friend said, Stan, did you see the flying saucer? And I said, no, I wasn't looking up. And oh, it was huge. It was blue. And there were figures in it poking up the window. And it lasted for about 20 seconds, and poof, it disappeared. And then my German friend came, Stan, did you see the... I said that to my Brazilian, don't you say a word. Let's see what our friend say. It was huge. It was blue. And it looked like there were figures inside looking out the window. Lasted for 15 seconds and then disappeared. Well, there we had a mutual correspondence. Both had apparently seen the same thing, whatever it was. And then our host said, oh, well, we see flying saucers all the time. We think that the aliens really enjoy our music and our meditation. So there you have it. That's my two personal experiences. So all I can say is I'm monitoring the situation. I don't have any easy answers, and I'm not going to jump to conclusions because some of these craft might be human-made. They might be secret U.S., Russian, Chinese vehicles. We don't know. But something is happening there and it's worthwhile following.
I think it's very interesting, Stan, that these two experiences occurred in Brazil. I know from our previous interview on the Brazilian Spiritist religions that you are very involved. You were a representative of the Brazilian Spiritists, as I recall, at one of the World Congresses of Religion, and they believe in a variety of non-human intelligent beings, not necessarily aliens, but deities. And I wonder if you think there might be a relationship there.
Well, there certainly could be. And Carl Gustav Jung used the term archetype to refer to something primordial that is basically inherited, part of the human psyche. And these archetypes, I think, serve as the templates for the gods and goddesses, the spirit guides, even the animal guides that a lot of shamans and people in the spiritistic religions come to believe in. And of course, in Brazil, I've had quite remarkable psychic experiences with a man by the name of Amir Ahmadin, and I've devoted a whole discussion on one of your interviews about him. But after the interview was over, I went back to Brazil, and this was just very recently, a year and a half ago, and he was not available to see me. But while I was there, strange things kept appearing in my room. And I thought, it seems like Amir is active again. The last time I had seen Amir, I had my flash camera with me. He got out of the car. I took his picture, and poof, immediately a French coin dropped out of the sky. A beautiful mint coin commemorating Joan of Arc. I actually have over a dozen what we call apports from my time with Amir. Where are they? They're all at the University of Manitoba, which has a special collection of apports that people have donated and that are available for research studies. So I could devote the whole program to my experiences in Brazil, not only with psychic phenomena, but with creative people, with people of different faiths, people who are artistic, people who are musicians, and I probably have been in Brazil 2 dozen or 30 times.
That's also very fascinating. I remember quite well the interview we did about Amir Ahmadin. And also, I've subsequently learned that not only does the University of Manitoba house your collection of apports, they also happen to have the archives of psychic news in their collection, which is the Spiritualist newspaper, weekly newspaper from Great Britain. And there are many, many fascinating stories there about apports and materializations that were observed in the British spiritualist community. But let me switch gears now. We have a question from our mutual friend, Dr. Debbie Jaffe Ellis, who says, please ask Stan to talk about the impact of Albert Ellis on his life and work, and to talk about the work that you and Debbie together have done since Al's passing.
Well, actually, Albert Ellis was one of my all time heroes. He had a very important impact on my life. For the listeners who don't know who he was, well, he was easily one of the 3 or 4 most prominent American psychologists of the 20th and even the 21st century. And he literally founded what we call cognitive behavioral psychotherapy. And of course, hundreds of thousands of people have benefited from this work. Now, I have so many stories about Albert Ellis to take the rest of the program to talk about them. But let me just say that at one point when I was working in Mexico at the university, they wanted to bring Albert Ellis and have him do a workshop with me because my own work in personal mythology was triggered by what I'd learned from Albert Ellis. And so we worked out a system where Al would give 2 seminars during the day, and then he would go to bed and I would give a seminar at night. And when this was announced, my Mexican friends wanted to get local universities to send students. And they said, oh, no, they're not active. Albert Ellis, Stanley Krippner, they wouldn't come to our little town of Juarez, Mexico. At the last minute, they'll send substitutes. So we lost out of hundreds of people who would have benefited from those seminars. We had 150 people at the seminar. We could have had 500. But anyway, Al and I had a delightful time together. And the fact that I gave my seminars at night meant that I was able to cover, shall we say, some transpersonal aspects of personal mythology and rational motive behavior therapy that Al stayed away from. As Al memorably said, well, Stan is much more metaphysical than I am, but he's a good guy nevertheless. And again, um, that seminar is one of my fondest experiences. I'm probably the only person in the world who's given a seminar both with Albert Ellis and with his wife, Debbie Jaffa Ellis, which I did in Mexico City a few years later. I think that, again, our book, Understanding Suicide's Allure, Debbie is one of the co-authors, and we talk about rational motive behavior therapy as a very evidence-based and productive way to not only prevent suicide, but to help people to think and feel and behave in healthy, constructive ways.
I'm very fascinated by that title, Understanding Suicide's Allure, because I can well imagine that for many people, suicide is seductive in a sense. And I wonder if you can say any more about the allure of suicide and how you came up with that title.
Yes, suicide is very seductive. And my original title of the book was The Allure of Suicide. But the publisher wanted to make it more positive and said, Understanding Suicide's Allure, Steps to Save Lives by Healing Psychological Scars, emphasizing the healing and the preventive aspects, which is what we tried to do in the book. And indeed, teenagers are especially vulnerable to making snap decisions. A lot of suicides are done almost at the spur of the moment. That's why it's so difficult to predict, not impossible, but difficult to predict who is going to try to take their own lives. We devote a lot of time in the book to teenagers. We have a whole chapter on building a better teenage brain, how to help teenagers think and behave rationally and creatively, and so they do not succumb to the allure of suicide.
Once again, I'm going to shift gears because we're getting all kinds of questions on so many topics, naturally, because your career has covered so many different topics, Stan. This is from Emily Montebello, and she says, what do you think about the stories various native peoples have about the star people? Do you have any thoughts about what that's all about?
Well, as you know, I have had the good fortune of working with or visiting a number of shamans, medicine men, medicine women from all over the world. And my good friend Rolling Thunder, who is no longer with us, but who was a Cherokee Shoshone medicine man, really felt that the star people had visited Earth and occasionally continued to make the visits. You talk to the medicine people, not only from the indigenous communities in the United States, but other parts of the world. Yes, many of them talk about visits from the star people, as they call them, and that they still visit. There are some Native Americans in highly respected academic positions who assert that, yes, indeed, this is a reality. The star people not only have observed the Earth, but they're with us today. They go under disguises. They're trying to help us to save our planet, which is in great danger. And I don't want to go into this in great detail, but there's also the belief that not all of the visitors are actually benign. Some of them are very destructive. Some of them are very negative. And so again, defending oneself, defending the earth one way or the other is a complicated thing. And one must have clarity of thought and purpose to do something constructive. This is where rational emotive behavior therapy comes into the picture. think rationally, feel rationally, behave rationally and sensibly and practically with love and benevolence in your heart, and you're doing the right thing.
Well, speaking of doing the right thing, Christopher Michael says, Dr. Krippner, working with veterans, trauma and suicides, do you believe the military might see parapsychology and psychedelic therapies as threatening as these teachings move us closer to pacifism?
Oh, good heavens, what a question. Let me start out by saying, in our book, Understanding Suicide's Allure, we spend a lot of time talking about combat veterans, veterans who never saw combat, and why they're especially at risk for ending their own lives. And we do bring in a number of suggestions for prevention. Um, Again, just to give you a couple of conclusions, different types of meditation seem to be helpful, both as the preventative measure and as a treatment for people with post-traumatic stress disorder. And the interesting thing about veterans is that although maybe at least a dozen veterans kill themselves every day, those who saw combat are no more at risk than those who did not see combat. So, but both groups kill themselves at a higher ratio of similar people of similar ages and similar backgrounds in the general population. I get a newsletter from the Veterans Administration Hospital to see what advances they're making and what programs they have. They have some very, very good programs, many more programs that existed decades ago. They're on the right track, but private groups can also do their bit. And I think that I'm not a clinician, I'm not a psychotherapist, but I have clinician friends who devote some of their time pro bono without fees to help veterans who are at risk. I think one of the major contributions we make in the book is to talk about post-traumatic stress disorder nightmares and how if you get the nightmares changed, everything else starts to pull together. The nightmare is not a typical dream. You don't use it as a way of achieving insight because the nightmare is a replay of a trauma. A nightmare is a replay of killing an innocent child in Iraq, for example, or in burning down a house that was thought to be an enemy stronghold and killing the family. And the veteran comes back riddled with guilt and has nightmares about this. Using imagery rehearsal therapy, IRT, somebody can learn to redream the nightmare during the day and give it a positive ending. You can't change history, but you can say, I'm sorry that that child was killed, that family was killed. Something within me died too. We're all victims of a war that really did not make sense. And what I will do is to live my life full, and I will donate some of my time to helping survivors, women who are surviving rape, children who are orphaned, men uh, who have been abused by the system, and this will help bring something positive. Now, once you change the nightmare into something positive, then they can dream normally and naturally, and the other symptoms like depersonalization, withdrawal, uh, different types of antisocial behavior, failure to find work, failure to find relationships, those then begin to clear up. Of course, especially if this is joined with some other type of therapy, such as rational emotive behavior therapy, or even psychodynamic therapy, which helps some veterans. So I hope that that touches a number of bases for you.
Uh, that was a very thorough answer, but Christopher Michael has a follow-up question, which is related. Says, with your long years regarding your knowledge of Alan Watts and his ideas, is there a place for violence in any form of warfare at all? Is there ever a just war, in your personal opinion?
Another intriguing question. Well, as you know, Alan Watts is one of my great heroes. And I spent a great deal of time with Alan, both in New York City and in San Francisco. And he made a very strong impact on my life. Much of what he taught me about Eastern wisdom is something I try to practice every day. And I think that from Alan Watts's perspective, and from a number of perspectives from what I've learned from Buddhism, various branches, Taoism, Hindu philosophy, love and peace are to be preferred over violence. However, let's face it, in human evolution, cooperation was necessary to preserve the species, but so was violence. People had to protect themselves against animals, against other tribes. So we are hardwired for both love and hate. We're hardwired for both benevolence and malevolence. And in this day and age, malevolence is no longer adaptive. It's something we should have outgrown, but of course we haven't. The historical records show that things tend to get a little better. Despite all of the violence in the world today, things are better than they were a few hundred years ago when there was even more violence, if you can believe it. So is there a just war? I would say not really. I would say that some wars are more unjust than others. I think that World War II, for example, what could be done? What could be done? Uh, the threats from Hitler's Germany, from the Japanese Empire, um, first of all, that could have been prevented historically if people had been on their toes before the capitulation at Munich to Adolf Hitler, before the Japanese invaded Manchuria and later the rest of China. Nothing was done before the Italians invaded Ethiopia, and Haile Selassie, the emperor, went to the League of Nations begging for help, and they turned a cold shoulder. I think prevention is the best way to prevent wars, justified or unjustified. If you take, and again, I don't want to be dogmatic, I think the Korean War, I think the Vietnam War, the Middle Eastern wars could have been prevented if our policy leaders would have used better judgment and not made some of the unfortunate decisions they made. And as a result, we are still fighting wars in this day and age.
Once again, I'm going to shift gears, Stan. Here's a question from CH, who says, esteemed Dr. Krippner, have you ever been in touch with or learn about the Brazilian Chico Xavier's books, considered one of the biggest paranormal demonstrations of automatic writing? And do you have an opinion about Chico Xavier?
Oh, I certainly do have an opinion. Chico Xavier was one of the great mediums of all time. I rank him and Eileen Garrett as the two greatest mediums of the 20th century. My friends in Brazil tried to get an appointment for me to see Chico twice, but his illness forced him to cancel the appointments, which is a shame. I would have loved to have met him. Now, why is he so important? Because he was very much open to investigations. He and his spirit guides, who dictated through him, came up with literally dozens of books, plays, spiritual essays, even movie scripts, poems. And when linguists have examined, for example, his writings, they are written in a different style than his ordinary everyday writings. You can do this linguistically, and you can compare the language from a altered state of consciousness with the language from one's everyday state of consciousness, and usually they match. With Chico, no, they do not match. It is as if they are two different people. And Chico Xavier came up, of course, with perhaps a dozen spirit guides, all of whom did their own writing. This is an untapped reservoir of material that really needs to be looked at more closely. And I think it provides some very, very good evidence that goes beyond what Chico could do with mere imagination and or even coincidence, and certainly not fraud. So yes, I endorse studies of Chico Xavier. Great inspiration to me. His writings make sense. The Brazilian film Nossa Lar, Our Place, is based on one of his writings. It's a beautiful film depicting of what happens life after death. It's available on DVD in an English language format, for example. And this could be an introduction to some of your people who are listening if they want to hear more about Chico Xavier and the spiritistic conception of life after death.
Here's a related question, sort of. And this is a hard name to pronounce. I'm going to just spell it out. MA9R1X asks, different people I know see similar dreams featuring me. Should I just assume this as coincidence, or is it something more?
Again, I make a practice of not interpreting somebody's dreams because I don't have enough context, I don't have enough background. All I can say is that if this were my dream and I appeared in somebody else's dream, I would look at the dream and see if it reflects the experience the two of us have had together. If not, I would think that my appearance in the dream is a substitute or stand in for somebody else or some other situation in a person's life. And for example, many of my friends know about my interest in parapsychology. So if they dream about me in their dream, maybe that's a call for them to look at some of their own experiences to see if indeed it might have been telepathy, clairvoyance, remote viewing, etc. Remember that dreams do a lot of condensation. This is Freud's term, and I think he was right. For dreams to be effective, they have to take a lot of information and merge it together economically, like a type of shorthand. And so if you unpeel it layer by layer, you can get to the message of that particular dream. Just remember that dreaming serves a number of purposes. I think, going back to evolution, yes, I think dreams are a product of human evolution. They helped us process memories. They helped us download emotions. They helped us plan for the future. They helped us solve problems. All of these are helpful from an evolutionary point of view. Now, this happens whether we interpret the dream or not. But if we want to record and interpret the dream, I would say go to some of the excellent dream books in the field, written by friends of mine such as Gail Delaney, Patricia Garfield, numerous other people who you can find out about, and you can get a handle on how to interpret your own dreams. So that's a long about way of answering your question, but does give me an opportunity to talk about what happens when somebody, for an unknown purpose, pops up in someone's dream.
We have several questions that go along these lines. One from Adam Pollock and one from Syed Algarb, who are saying, how do you differentiate between legitimate psychic activity and psychosis or schizophrenia?
Yes, actually, there's a huge literature on this, and it can be done. Again, I'm not a clinician, but if it's a genuine psychic experience, there's some way you can verify it. You can, if it's a dream about the future, you can find out if the dream came true. If it's a dream about another person's activities, you can check with that person to see if they were engaging in that activity. You do what we call a reality check. The schizophrenic, on the other hand, the dreams, especially the paranoid dreams about somebody out to get them, somebody out to poison them, somebody influencing them from addiction, they're not anchored in reality. You can't find any real life reference for that. And this is why a psychotherapist needs to know about the field of parapsychology so that they can, again, in their own humble way, start to differentiate between the reports that are blatantly nonsense, blatantly psychotic, and those that might have some validity in real life situations. Again, more psychotherapists need to be trained and taught in this determination, but I think it's a very worthwhile effort. Again, my great mentor, Montague Ullman, wrote widely on this topic. He was a psychoanalyst, and again, he had no trouble differentiating the dreams that came from psychic sources and the hallucinatory dreams. In fact, he was having dreams about his clients' personal lives. They're having dreams about his personal life. This is what triggered him into starting the dream telepathy experiments at Maimonides Medical Center. So our experiments, which I helped run for 10 years, actually had a basis in this type of psychodynamic, psychoanalytical experience.
Here's a question from somebody named Design Ideas. People get to choose their own names like this on YouTube. And Design Ideas asks, was Nina Kulagina authentic or a trickster?
When I was in Russia, I tried to interview Nina Kulagina, and the government would not let me see her. I did interview her husband, however. I did interview a number of other people who were doing this work. But colleagues of mine, Montague Ullman, who I mentioned a minute ago, also a team from Europe, did see her and did watch her as she moved objects on a table by what we assume is psychokinesis. And there was a film made of Kulagina that showed her moving objects under a glass covering so that she could not be in touch. Montague Ullman and I showed this film to Milbourne Christopher, one of the leading magicians of the 20th century, and he said, well, it's very obvious. She's attached a string to the object, and that string easily slipped from under the glass covering. So he felt that she was a complete fraud. Well, he might have been right. We'll never know for sure because proper research was never done with her when she was alive. I think that it's to the credit of the Russian government, in those days the Soviet government, they actually gave an award to Kulagina while she was still alive, honoring her for her contributions. And the Soviet Encyclopedia, in an article written by 4 leading Soviet psychologists, said, well, obviously, some of these exceptional experiences do happen. But when they happen, they can all be explained on the principles of Marxism and Leninism. Well, let's face it, that's further than American psychologists in an official capacity have ever come up with. So, again, I've written an entire book, Human Possibilities, about my time in the Soviet Union and what I observed. And I should mention that we showed the film to our staff members at Maimonides Medical Center. Felicia Parisi was so inspired, she practiced moving objects herself. And she was actually able to do so under controlled conditions. It took a lot of energy from her. It was not easy to do. And so my associate, Charles Allerton, observed this, published it, and so her work did have at least one spin-off effect.
I think it's probably reasonable to assume that if Felicia Parisi could do it under better conditions observed by Honerton, then Kulagina probably was legitimate.
I got into a lot of trouble by making that statement in print. And Martin Gardner, who was no longer with us, but who was a prominent skeptic and who what I would call a pseudo-skeptic because he did not use the tools of actual skepticism. Yes, he really wrote devastating articles about me and how I had been fooled by Kalagana and all of the other psychics. And so, again, my sympathy toward Kalagana and attempt to honor her did trigger some personal attacks on my part.
Okay, let's shift gears once again. Dan 1 is asking, thank you for being there. He says, what's your opinion regarding the Seth material through Jane Roberts' writing? And do you think it might be related to Bohm or the view of the holographic universe?
I'm glad you brought up the holographic theory of the universe because another way of putting it is that on planet Earth there is one mind. And again, this is what Carl Gustav Jung would call the collective unconscious. This one mind unites people, not only people, but all sentient beings. And there is a global consciousness. And if there's a global consciousness, of course, why can't Seth, whoever or whatever he might or might not be, communicate with living people and provide messages, which in this case are inspirational? I've read the Seth materials, and the Seth materials are certainly inspirational. One can learn a lot from them, and they're still being published, still being discussed. One of the people in the Seth community, by the way, is coming out with a new book in which she claims to have communications with 20 different people who are no longer with us, including Aldous Huxley, of all people, who was the husband of a dear friend of mine, Laura Huxley. This book is about to be published, so you might take a look at that. I think that, again, the bottom line is take a look at this information and judge it on its merits. The advice that Seth provides, I think, is quite helpful. I think that the information that Chico Xavier in Brazil provides, the philosophy, is very, very helpful. It fosters human cooperation. It fosters love. It fosters empathy. It fosters closeness. The divisions in the world today don't make much sense in terms of the fact that at some level we're all basically connected. As Native Americans say, these are all our relations, not only human relations, but the beings that walk on all fours, the beings that crawl on their stomachs, the beings that fly through the air. These are all our relations. There's a unity to life that all too often gets neglected. So Seth Speaks is, I think, worthwhile reading because aside from worrying about the origin, the advice makes a lot of sense.
And we've got a question here from John Alexander, who's been a guest on this program. I think you probably know John as well. And he asks about, haven't there been interactions between humans and sentient non-humans throughout recorded history?
Well, first of all, I would like to urge my listeners to look into John Alexander's books he's written about his explorations and those of him and his wife. Remarkable. He's like a modern day Indiana Jones. He's been all over the world investigating interesting and controversial topics. So any question of his is certainly well worth responding to. There are certainly in human history and even in human legends numerous examples of communication with other sentient beings from outer space, from other times, other places, who knows? And you find a lot of this in the shamanic traditions, in the mystical literature. You find this in wisdom teachings from east, west, north, and south. You don't find this in modern day Western philosophy and psychology. And perhaps you're missing something. perhaps we really need to take a close look at some of these recordings and see if there's something that we're missing that we're well advised to pay attention to. In this day and age, when life is so critical, when life is certainly at a balance, both of the threat of atomic warfare and the threat of climate change and devastation of the planet, we need all the wisdom we can get. So, whatever the source, let's pay attention to it.
And I've got a question from somebody named Seth Schmucker, in this case, who is asking Stan, what is the secret to living a long, healthy life?
Well, I don't think I have any personal secrets. I simply, shall we say, stand on the shoulder of others who are wiser than I am. I think that when push comes to shove, it boils down to bringing love into one's life. Love is what connects us with other human beings. It connects us with other forms of life. It connects us with sentient beings from wherever they might come from. And love, kindness, benevolence, forgiveness, if there's a secret, I would say bring more of this into your life and you can't go wrong.
Here is an interesting question from the Talk Watcher, who is asking about dreams and the Bardo realms. Is there a relationship between dreaming and the afterlife?
I think for your listeners who don't know what the Bardo is, this is a plane of existence that one travels through after death. There are various Bardos or levels of being that enable one to be cleansed and attain nirvana or become another incarnation. I think that there is no direct correspondence with dreams in the Eastern literature. Some people would say that the discussion of bardos comes from people's dreams, that the Buddhist philosophers who started writing about the bardos were actually transcribing some of their own dreams or even their waking fantasies. All that we can say is the connection indicates that there is more to human consciousness than our everyday waking ways of thinking, feeling, and behaving. And this is a whole literature that's worth studying and that we ignore at our peril.
Okay. And here's a question from San Man, who says, is asking about daily routines. Do you recommend any daily routines, and do you subscribe to any daily routines yourself?
Yes, I've subscribed to daily routines. I think that routines are very, very helpful in ordering one's life. And I think that a period of time every day for contemplation or meditation should be part of the routine. In my case, I have a lot of life challenges. At my age, of course, there are a lot of health challenges, financial challenges, all of that. But I devote a few minutes every day to gratitude for recounting something that I have gratitude about, something I'm thankful for. And despite all of the other hassles and pressures upon me, if I'm grateful for at least one thing every day, that helped me keep equilibrium. Also, I think that there need to be rituals before one goes to bed at night to ensure rest and sleep. And I think there need to be rituals in the morning to help a person get off to a good start during the day. Just be careful that the rituals do not become ossified or dogmatic. Keep them fresh every day. If you're going for a walk as part of a ritual, take a different path every once in a while. If you're eating certain foods as part of the ritual, health foods, shift from time to time so that there's some flexibility in your ritual. So that's the best I can do. But again, that's an interesting question. This is something practical that your listeners could subscribe to.
And here's a question from Suzanne Taylor. Perhaps you know Suzanne. She's asking you about psychology, the future of psychology. Do you think that there will be more areas in the psychology of the future?
Well, first of all, I'd recommend my friend Stanislaus Grof's book, The Future of Psychology. And he envisions this type of psychology that is based on some of the findings from psychedelic psychotherapy. It's a very bold program. I don't know how soon it will all come to pass, but it's a psychology that is much more encompassing than today's psychology. Also, I have to stress the fact that I have a great respect for contemporary psychologists. I'm a member of both the American Psychological Association and the Society for Psychological Science. I'm a fellow in both groups. I'm a member of good standing in both groups. I've presented at both of their annual conventions. And as I said, the American Psychological Association published our book, of Varieties of Anomalous Experience. So I don't have a big quarrel with contemporary psychology. I think it is it's open to something that you can provide evidence for. And as long as something is evidence-based, excellent. You take a look at our dream telepathy studies, one constant criticism, well, you can't repeat that. You can't repeat it. Well, first of all, many things in mainstream psychology cannot be easily repeated. Human beings are very complex, and it's difficult to repeat a complex pattern. Secondly, there was a recent article studying 50 years of dream telepathy studies, not only in our laboratory, other laboratories as well, published in the International Journal of Dream Research. And the replication rate was quite decent, way beyond the laws of chance. And other people in other laboratories have repeated a number of our studies, not only in dream telepathy, but in dreams about the future that were in a controlled setting. I think that if one wants to add to the progress of psychology, find a way to verify, find a way to provide evidence and document evidence. Now, this is still not going to be enough to appease the hardliners who refuse to consider anything that they cannot explain. Look, a number of things we accept without explaining. It was decades before we understood the mechanism of aspirin based on the willow tree that Native Americans used. Now we understand it, but it helped people, probably hundreds of thousands of people, before we found an understanding. So don't say that we have to understand something before we accept it. If we have evidence, fine, that becomes a chunk in the whole mosaic of what psychology can base future research and future decisions on. And remember that psychology is out to help people. One of the former presidents of psychology, Dr. Miller, had the phrase, giving psychology away. Yeah, we need to find ways in which psychology can be practical and help people. Is it any wonder that we now have a boom in psychology graduate programs, slightly more women than men going into psychology, which I think is a positive sign, people of color, people from various backgrounds, people with different sexual orientations, different gender identities, coming to psychology. All of those will contribute to the tapestry of the future.
We've got a question from Laura Hovey Newbert, who is one of our volunteers. She's asking about dissociative PTSD, and also what do you think is the most important scholarly contribution to our understanding of PTSD?
I think that post-traumatic stress disorder is certainly a sort of a plague of our times. It's always existed, but we haven't been able to describe or define it adequately until fairly recently. One of the varieties of PTSD is dissociative PTSD, where people dissociate, where their stream of consciousness is interrupted, and they sort of leave their grounding and go off, for better or for worse, on some sort of tangent. In extreme cases, you have dissociative identity disorder, where somebody takes on a different personality and a different identity. Now, these cases are rare, but they can be illustrative in terms of the extent to which dissociation can take place. I think that dissociation, in terms of PTSD, has to be addressed very directively. If somebody dissociates, that means there's something in their current existence they're trying to escape, some pain, some trauma they're trying to escape. Focus on resolving the trauma, resolving the pain, and then the dissociation will start to disappear and they'll come back to ordinary functioning. I think that the question is, what has been the most important contribution to understanding dissociation in PTSD? I think that the work on post-traumatic strengths has been very important. Post-traumatic stress disorder can be addressed by finding ways in which the experience can strengthen somebody. The experience in the military might have brought about a trauma, but it also provided the person with new skills, new ways of cooperating, new ways of relating to people. And a post-traumatic strength can help address dissociation. Many books, excellent books on post-traumatic strengths. And I think that this is a major direction to the future. Something, again, that we address in our book, Understanding Suicide's Allure, when we talk about PTSD. Also, I should mention that we're beginning to understand that the human being is not unitary. James Fadiman, a good friend of mine, has recently written a book with a collaborator, Your Symphony of Selves. There are actually many selves, all within what we call our core identity. And sometimes one of these dissociated selves takes over. And we need to find out when this dissociated identity is helpful and when it's harmful. So by realizing that we are more than what our ordinary state of consciousness realizes is a way that we can function in I should say, the full panoply of our being. Luc Sala, who's a Dutch journalist, has written a book about substitute identities, where somebody will substitute an identity for better or for worse to help them cope better. And again, this is another form of dissociation. Well, your question has just opened up all sorts of doors for me. Let me just say that this is a big challenge to psychotherapists and counselors, and they should all be studying dissociation. I'm a member of the International Society for the Study of Dissociation and Trauma, and our society has meetings, workshops, podcasts that help therapists and other interested people to understand more about dissociation and get the training so that they can be helpful to students and clients and patients.
Thank you for that, Stan. And let me let our viewers know that we're going to go for another 25 minutes until we reach the bottom of the hour. We've already been going for over an hour, Stan. Here's a question from Lynn Price, who is asking if you think there could be, or what are the practical applications for precognition of future events?
Well, a friend of mine has written a book, Planning for Your Future, and he addresses this very issue. I think that, again, it's important to focus on whether a precognitive hunch is valid or not. I think cognition plays a very important role in intuition, in hunches. And when one is in full command of their, shall we say, subpersonalities, of their other ways of being, other parts of the stream of consciousness, as William James used the term, one can get hunches and intuitions about possible future events. Sometimes these can actually be life-saving. Dr. Louisa Ryan, who, again, great hero of mine and who I knew for decades, collected cases of people who had precognitions that saved their lives. Among them was the case of a humble family, slept in one bedroom. The baby was in a crib. The mother and father were in the nearby bed. And one night the mother woke up and it was a dream about something at 2 o'clock in the morning. The chandelier above her baby's crib had fallen down, killing the baby. She picked up the baby, took it into their own bed. Her husband said, "Oh, it's only a dream. You're just worried about our child." She says, "No, the baby's staying with us." Sure enough, at 2 o'clock in the morning, there was a crash. The light fixture had fallen down on the baby's bed. So this was a case where paying attention to precognition saved a person's life. Louisa Ryan found out that in 80% of the cases where somebody intervened and took the precognition seriously, the outcome had been changed. So life is not written in stone. Consciousness events are not linear. They're complex. We have a whole field of science called chaos theory. Yes, a lot of life is chaotic, and there can be order in that chaos if we give up our notion that everything is past, present, future, and that there are certain dividing lines among them. So I think that in paying attention to our hunches, we also have to be reality-based. When is the hunch not coming true? By keeping track of one's hunches, one's precognitions, one's dreams about the future, and writing them down, one can see if there's a pattern. One friend of mine knows that a dream is precognitive if there's a silvery glow to the events in the dream. Another friend says when there are numbers in the dream, it's more likely to be precognitive. You don't know this unless you start keeping track. Again, this is a discipline. Many people don't want to bother about it, don't want to take the time. But yes, there is a way that you can make sense out of all these things. It requires discipline. It's like meditation, like contemplation, like prayer. A discipline, if you want to put it to use, you have to practice it.
What a wonderful answer, Stan. Thank you for that. And we have a question coming in from our mutual friend, Russell Targ, who asks, Stan, do you have any experience with blind psychics?
Well, again, my hat's off to Russell Targ. I would tell your listeners to check out his books. He has written wonderful books, easily to understand, about his very, very pioneering research in remote viewing and the implications and how people can put their remote viewing capacities to personal use. So, thank you, Russell, for joining us. Now, in my contact with blind people, and I've had several contacts with blind people because my undergraduate major was in special education, I have not had a lot of experience with people who have alleged psychic capacities or also blind. However, I will start to tell you an interesting story. Over half a century ago, J.B. Ryan asked me to interview a young woman who claimed that she could teach blind people to see. And I went to her home, and she put on a mask, and she was able to read a newspaper that I had brought with me. Well, I observed her very, very carefully, and I noticed that when I began to lift the paper up, her abilities faded. Even though I had put cotton under the nose to keep her from peeking, even though the blindfold was very, very tight. And I was thinking, what's going on here? I got back home and I did the same thing with the blindfold, put cotton underneath. I found out that if I scrunched my nose while the cotton was going in, then unschrunched it when the cotton was in, there was a beam of light could come up. And so I did demonstrations for friends of mine, and they thought, oh, you've mastered the ability of seeing through a blindfold. Of course, I told them how I had used sleight of hand to do so. And her name was Margaret Foos, Foos, never forget her. And she actually, allegedly, was teaching blind people to see. Again, no controlled studies. I always ask, where is the beef? And in this case, there wasn't much of any, and she soon faded from public view. But blind people often have developed ways of enhancing their other senses: smell, taste, touch, hearing. And this often fills in for what they are missing when they cannot see, or even when they're handicapped in terms of what they see. So other people can address this better than I can. And again, in parapsychology, there are many, many untouched areas. I think studying the psychic experience, or the alleged psychic experiences of blind or blind dead people, could be a very productive route.
And here's an interesting question from Lana Parker Ray, who says, do you believe being contacted by our relatives who are deceased is more dependent on our will or their will?
Well, who knows? I think that this is open for discussion. And again, from my experience in the field, which is not all encompassing, what I have found out is that for people from the other side to contact us, especially relatives, it does require some energy on their part. It's not easy, and not all of them can do this. So I think that we need to be receptive to it, and maybe adopt a receptivity that if any of our passed on loved ones are trying to contact us, will be open. Not everybody wants to be contacted by loved ones, by the way, and then it rarely happens. So it's what we call a two-way street. But I think that the effort that comes from the other side simply is not worth it for many of the people. I was telling you that I had the experience of taking many groups to Brazil. An organization called the Institute of Noetic Sciences sponsored the trips. And one time, one of the members of our group was trying to contact her deceased son, who died at a very young age in an automobile accident, left her with an irreparable wound. And she was paying a great deal of money each month to a medium who would contact him, and he would respond from the other side. When we were in Brazil, I arranged for her to see a medium, and we went to the roof of our hotel, and he went into his ritual, allegedly contacted her son on the other side. And what did the son say? Please tell my mother to keep that medium away from me. It just takes too much time and effort for me to contact you. I do it because I feel compassion for you, but I'm fine on the other side. I have my own activities, my own work to do. So don't send her any more money. Say that you're satisfied. At that moment, a shooting star came through the sky. And I said to the woman, well, there you have verification. Take that advice. She took that advice. She stopped sending the medium money and was content and happy with the outcome.
That's a wonderful story. And here's a related question from Francesca Ferraro, who is a spiritual medium, and is asking, what are your thoughts and experiences with physical mediumship?
I think that physical mediumship, of course, was much more popular 100 years ago than it is now. I think that you look at the evidence, you artifacts from those days, a case can certainly be made from it. Again, your listeners might not know what physical mediumship is. In physical mediumship, there's actually a manifestation of some sort, what we call an apport, something dropping out of nowhere, what is called ectoplasm, a strange subject that seems to be coming from the mouth or the body of the medium. Um, in the darkened room, somebody being tapped on the shoulders by an alleged spirit. Now, all of these things should perfectly be done by sleight of hand. So to investigate them requires a great deal of discipline. I think it's worth investigating, of course, because the results are very often very, very dramatic. There's a literature on this that your audience can listen into. Again, in my experience, Amir Ahmadin from Brazil, you could call a medium because he claimed to be in contact with not entities from the other side who lived on Earth, but who had their own existence. And he would be with us in a office of the director of the foundation of the City of Peace in Brasilia, and we would simply wait patiently while he contemplated and called upon his resources, and then he'd say, something's going to happen. I feel an acid taste in my mouth. Immediately, we took his pulse, we took his saliva test, and what should happen? A coin would drop out of no place, or a piece of jewelry would fall from the skies. And then we did another test with pulse, saliva, etc. After a week of this, we had 96 instances of anomalous experience. We had a student in an open field with a magnetometer checking magnetic fluctuations. And this was the only magnetometer in Brasilia. But it was worthwhile because we found out that whenever these physical manifestations occurred, there was, first of all, a change in his pulse. It became much more active and then slowed down. There was more acid. It didn't reach statistical significance, but it was in that direction. And most important, there was a fluctuation in the geomagnetic field. This is the only sustained effort that's ever been made to measure fluctuations in the Earth's geomagnetic field and connect it with physical mediumship, which we did. The article is there for people to read in the Journal of Scientific Exploration. I'm presenting a follow-up in the British psychic newsletter, which is part of the Society for Psychical Research. It'll be coming out in the next few months. And so again, when I had these experiences, I like to document them. And then they're made public. People can take them, criticize them, reject them, accept them, but at least they're out there in the universe. So physical mediumship is something well worth documenting. And I should say that you, Jeff, have done a lot of work with the PK Man and have well documented it in your book, The PK Man, which is a very important document in parapsychology. Wish more people would read it.
Well, thank you for that plug, Stan. And of course, we've also done two interviews with Stuart Alexander, who is a living physical medium who works in the United Kingdom, who has been studied by members of the Society for Psychical Research and has written extensively as well about his work. And speaking of mediumship, we have a question here from Crunker Lover, he's asking, this is a very interesting question about deceased people who have reincarnated. Have there been instances where we know somebody has reincarnated, or we believe that they've reincarnated, but they've also been contacted by mediums?
Well, certainly that's a very interesting field of study. And different mediums have different sensitivities. Different mediums do different things. So this is sort of a specialty for some mediums, I would assume. And again, if your readers are interested in past life reports, I have to say that we got a chapter on the topic into our book, Varieties of Anomalous Experience, published by the American Psychological Association, and we present the evidence of past life reports. Also, people can investigate the voluminous examples in Ian Stevenson's work and those of members of his staff who have followed up after he passed on. So there are literally dozens of cases that have some degree of verification of people living in the present day and age who claim that they had a past life. The data is there. I think again, a good case can be made for it. A lot of it can be explained by other explanations, like coincidence, even what we call super ESP, telepathy, clairvoyance, remote viewing, etc. But not all of it. Much of it is too specific to be easily brushed away. Of course, I have to tell our readers and listeners, much of what you're listening to is going to be rejected by a number of your friends who are very hostile, who are very close-minded to considerations of any of these parapsychological topics. And again, I would say be broad-minded, understand that their reinforcement history is different than yours. They've been conditioned to reject all such ideas. If you can get them to look at the evidence and to read documents pro and con, then maybe they would be at least a little more open to the consideration of some of these topics that we've been discussing.
Well, we only have 7 more minutes left. We have a question from Natalia Savoni, who is thanking you for this special talk today. And I certainly thank you, Stan, from the bottom of my heart. You've been very generous with the New Thinking Aloud audience. And Natalia is suggesting, everybody cannot be a parapsychologist. It'd be wonderful if they could be. But what can she do to become more grounded and at the same time open to all possibilities?
Well, I think this is a good question. One thing that she could do would be, if she's in the United States, is to become a member of the Parapsychological Association or the Society for Scientific Exploration. Both of them have websites. And to become a student member or an affiliate member is fairly easy. And then they would get for free wonderful journals, wonderful newsletters that will get them up to date. No, not everybody can be a parapsychologist. We would want them to be, because there's very few positions open in the field. You can't really make a living in most cases by being a parapsychologist, but you can bring that sensitivity what else they're doing. And of course, there's always the option of keeping a journal of one's own possible psychic experiences, one's own precognitive dreams, one's own hunches or intuitions. And once one keeps a journal, this can be very legitimate material for a professional parapsychologist to pursue. This is what the Army events planner did that I talked to you about. If she had not kept her journal, if she had not contacted me, who was able to make sense and put it in the scientific framework, we would have lost this wonderful series of experiences to science. So, yes, there's a lot that can be done, even though one is not a parapsychologist. And membership in one or both of those two groups as an affiliate member will keep somebody aware of what's happening in the field.
I would also add to that the Society for Psychical Research in England. They really do have an international reach. And if you join They also have a wonderful searchable database that you can have access to, because their records go back to the 1880s, 140 years of investigation that people can look into.
Absolutely. I'm a member. I've been a member for years of the Society for Psychical Research. And again, there are a number of freebies with all of these societies, a number of ways to keep current in terms of what's happening in the field. Sure.
And we might mention the Institute of Noetic Sciences as well.
Absolutely. You can be a member of IONS. And again, they have a newsletter, and they're doing cutting edge research on parapsychology and other aspects of what we might call frontier science. And so now we have 4 organizations that you can join, and I'm a member of all 4. I get newsletters from all 4. There's only so many hours in a day, and you might want to limit your choices to 1 or 2 of the 4, but the opportunities are there for you to take advantage of.
And while we're mentioning newsletters, the New Thinking Aloud channel publishes a weekly newsletter. If it's free, and of course, we also release several videos every week and do live streams such as this one every other Sunday. 2 weeks from today, we will have Mary Baxter, Dr. Mary Baxter, who will be talking about the Akashic field and its relationship to post-mortem survival. If you're interested in subscribing to the New Thinking Aloud newsletter, you can go to the New Thinking Aloud Foundation, which is New Thinking Aloud, ALLOWED. It's all one word, .org, which is different than the website for the videos, which is the same, but .com. Well, Stan, there's just 2 minutes left. It's been a joy to be with you. You are an amazing font of energy and wisdom and knowledge. Do you have any other parting thoughts before we end our live stream?
I would say that the last question, if you do nothing else, keep in touch with New Thinking Aloud. Get their newsletter, look at their podcasts, and this will keep you abreast of important things happening in the field. And as a parting thought, in terms of a recipe for happiness, I'll go back to my dear friend Albert Ellis, and he starts off any type of psychotherapy, any type of self-improvement by acceptance. Accept yourself unconditionally. Accept others unconditionally. Accept life unconditionally. You might not be happy, you might not agree, but acceptance is the first step to understanding and to live a happy life. If you start rejecting aspects of yourself, others in the universe, you're in for trouble. So acceptance is the opening to living a life of energy, love, compassion, and meaning.
Well, once again, Stan, thank you so much for being with me today. You are an incredible inspiration and role model. I felt that about you since I first heard you speak half a century ago. Really, you inspired me to pursue a career in parapsychology. So at this point, I'm going to close the live stream and thank all of our viewers for being with us today.
Oh, thank you for having me.